Okay, sorry, Belinda.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. This is the Governance Committee on the 24th of March 2025. I have some housekeeping announcements. Please note the location of the fire exits. And there's one behind us here, and there's one through there and out through the exit, the main entrance. This meeting is being live streamed and an audio recording being made. Please switch your microphone on and speak clearly when addressing the committee. And can you please make sure that your mobile phones and other devices are switched to silent? And very importantly, and out of courtesy and respect to the officers and other committee members, please could you refrain from using your mobile phone during the session so that we have your full attention, as it will also prove very distracting to those present. So I'm turning mine upside down so I can't see it. I suggest we all do the same. Okay, so apologies for absence. Apart from John Campbell, we're all here. Thank you. Right, minutes from last meeting. The committee is asked to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of December 2024 as the correct record. Do I have a proposer? Thank you, Ms. Councillor Brooks. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Vickers. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Number 3, declarations of members' interest. Does any member of the committee have an interest to declare in respect of any item on the agenda? That's no, thank you very much. Number 4, announcements. There are no announcements. So we'll now move on to the substantive. So number 5, the adoption of the Constitution. We will turn our attention to the report on the adoption of the Constitution. As many of you will recall, the Council took part in a governance peer challenge in February 2024. One of the key recommendations that emerged from this review was a suggestion that the Council undertake a thorough monitoring officer-led review of the Constitution. In response to this recommendation, we established a Constitutional Review Working Group at our meeting on the 8th of July 2024. The purpose of this group was to assist the monitoring officer in conducting a comprehensive review. You will recall that the working group included 7 members, the leaders of each of the 3 political groups, the chair and vice chair of the governance committee, and the chairs of both Overview and Scrutiny Committee and Audit Committee. This group has been actively engaged throughout the review process, providing valuable input on a wide range of issues. At this point, I'll hand over to the monitoring officer, who will guide us through the key areas of the review, particularly those where changes have been made.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think it is prudent to provide you with an overview of how we have undertaken this review. As you'd imagine, we adopted a consultative approach to consider a wide range of issues, including a number of key and significant areas. So we conducted meetings with heads of services, directors and chief executive. We conducted individual meetings with group leaders and the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And we sent a questionnaire to all members seeking their views on, for example, the policy development advisory groups. So how did we involve the working group specifically? We did 3 things. First, we circulated 2 questionnaires covering a wide range of topics. Subsequently, we held meetings to debate specific areas, for example, the scrutiny function, the planning function, disbanding PDAGs to be replaced by all member hybrid briefings, the key decision threshold, and the financial delegations for the Chief Finance Officer. And lastly, we disseminated draft sections of the Constitution to members for review, which has shaped the content, and I extend my gratitude to those members for putting the time and effort in helping us. So what is in the draft of the new Constitution? As you'd imagine, it is divided into various sections, grouping themes together. And I'll run through these by title because this is a fairly lengthy presentation. So first, we have an introduction which contains an overview of how the Council operates. Second, we talk about the Council's budget and policy framework. Third, the role of the chairman at the Council. Fourth, the full Council, the forum, and what it's responsible for. Fifth, the leader in the cabinet, again highlighting its responsibilities. We talk about the policy and scrutiny committees, which will be touched on more thoroughly later in this presentation. We talk about the committees and our subcommittees discharging the functions of full council. We have a section dedicated to officers. We have a section about legal matters, saying that the head of legal is has a responsibility to discharge all those functions associated with legal matters. We have a section on ethical governance, which contains the councillor's code of conduct, the officer's code of conduct, and the protocol on councillor-officer relations. We have another section on other rules and codes, plus a planning code of good practice, the do's and don'ts in the planning arena. We have a section on outside bodies, and a final section on our schemes, the councillor's allowance scheme and a petition scheme. So, for the purposes of today's presentation, we're going to concentrate on the most significant changes. So what are these? I've broken these down into several sections, the first being the financial considerations, the second, the policy and scrutiny function, third, the planning function, fourth, public engagement, and fifth, our property delegations. So taking each in turn. First, we looked at the key decision threshold. So what is this? We know that this is the financial threshold at which Cabinet must make decisions collectively, and that is presently set at £250,000. And the proposal is that this be increased to £500,000. What is the rationale for this? It is acknowledged that there are only 6 Cabinet meetings per year, which do not always align with the timing needs for certain decisions. Increasing the key decision threshold will reduce the administrative burden and the requirement to convene special Cabinet meetings on short notice, and it will allow for greater flexibility in managing routine or lower value matters in a timelier manner. The working group supported this proposal. They acknowledged that the key decision threshold had remained the same since possibly 2016. They acknowledged also that it had not been revised, taking into account inflation or operational needs, and members were reassured that there would be political oversight by Cabinet members up to the revised value. We then turned our attentions to the financial delegations for the Chief Finance Officer. And what are the proposals? First, that he be authorised to approve the receipt and the expenditure of grant funding for existing projects and existing services up to but excluding £500,000. Previously, this was £250,000, and this has been increased in line with the new key decision threshold. Second, to approve the receipt and expenditure of grant funding for new projects and new services up to and including £250,000, and under the old constitution, this was previously £100,000. To make decisions regarding any income and any expenditure not accounted for in the council's budget up to £250,000. Again, this is previously £100,000. And to approve the receipt and expenditure of grant funding from public sector bodies for existing or new projects and services. And to change fees and charges in order to cover the cost of providing a service. Crucially, to ensure political oversight of these delegations, they must be exercised in consultation with members, being the leader, the Cabinet Member for Finance, and the Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So again, what is the rationale for these proposals? Again, only having 6 full council meetings, which don't always align with the requirements for decisions. Expanding these delegations will reduce the administrative burden and the requirement to convene extraordinary council meetings at short notice. And members were supportive and took comfort in the fact that the exercise of these delegations would always be in consultation with members. Before we move on to the next section, do any members here present have any observations or would like to say anything? Thank you. We're now moving on to the policy and scrutiny function, and I'll hand over to our colleague Bradley to speak to you about this point.
Okay, so in terms of the background, the council is required by law to have at least one committee with responsibility for opium scrutiny. Opium scrutiny has a legitimate role in both developing and reviewing policy and scrutiny, and guidance issued by the Department for Communities and Local Government in 2000 states that one of the key elements of an overview and scrutiny committee's work is to be able to review and make recommendations either to the executive or to the full council and assist in development of future policies and strategies. So what is the current arrangement? Currently, we have one overview and scrutiny committee comprised of 15 members. Under its terms of reference, that overview and scrutiny committee has a role in the development of the budget and policy framework and may make proposals to the cabinet relating to policy development. And whilst not forming part of the formal scrutiny structure, we also have 4 joint policy development advisory groups covering each cabinet member portfolio. And the role of those PDAGs is to advise cabinet members on their functions. And therefore, there is a clear overlap between the role of scrutiny and the role of PDAGs. And then just turning to PDAGs, PDAGs are non-statutory bodies and don't have the powers that overview and scrutiny has. It can result in the duplication of effort where overview and scrutiny decide to look at the same matter. They lack focus because nearly all cabinet reports have to be considered by a PDAG. It's only contract award reports that don't have to be considered by a PDAG. They have limited transparency because the public are excluded from meetings and not all information is publicly available. They usually do not allow members to feed into policy development at a formative stage when there is the most opportunity to add value. The Local Government Association peer review that was undertaken last year made a couple of observations about the scrutiny function. So the peers observed that there was some duplication of effort where each and every decision needed to go through a cross-party PDAG process, which at times did not result in meaningful engagement. They felt that the role of scrutiny was not well understood or properly focused, and they said this position was not helped by the unclear position of PDAGs within the decision-making process. And they recommended that the current scrutiny arrangements be reviewed to create a more robust scrutiny process. So the proposal, and this was supported by the working group, is to have 2 policy and scrutiny committees, and they've been renamed. We've named them policy and scrutiny committees to really emphasise the policy development focus. There would be 15 members on each committee, and between them they will cover the council's 3 directorates, being communities, place and resources. And they will be called the Finance and Performance Policy and Scrutiny Committee and the Communities and Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee. And in addition to that, there will be regular all-member briefings to retain the briefing element of PDAGs, and indeed these have already started, and that reflects the really important briefing function of element of PDAGs, because of course the more information members know about what the council is doing, the more you can assist your residents. And this proposal ensures a more suitable forum for policy development, and it provides greater opportunities for member involvement in the formal scrutiny process, because instead of just having 15 seats, there'll now be 30 seats overall. There'll be additional capacity for formal scrutiny and policy development work, because instead of just having one committee with 6 meetings, we'll have 2 committees with 6 meetings. There will be the opportunity for more focused policy development work by reducing duplication and enabling members to target areas where they can add most value. And there will be a more transparent policy development process. If anybody has any observations at that point.
Councillor Clark.
Right. Yeah, I think if you can go back to your slides and go back again. Yeah, okay, so you're talking about PDAGs. If you can come back one, Bradley, I'm not sure which time.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it there. Okay, I think having seen it now written in this report, that my observation is, and I quote paragraph 1.11.3, the new constitution proposes disbanding PDAGs and replacement with all-member hybrid briefings. My problem lies with the word briefings. The PDAGs were mostly about briefings, but the PDAGs actually did have a role of scrutiny and proposal on policy. as was very successfully done when the issue of the Horsham Park and the Fields in Trust, etc., came in. And actually, that was a briefing that actually turned into a very useful piece of help with the policy, essentially. And you may say this is splitting hairs, but I think the issue is actually we shouldn't call them briefings, because briefing just says we're dumping on you and we're giving you information. That's it. It should be a two-way street. And consultation, actually, because it was effective in the PDAGs. So, you know, if it was called all member consultations or something like that, a different word, it would give a better sense of what we're looking to achieve. Using the word briefings, in my opinion, and I'm quite happy to be corrected by, so I would propose that we change the word briefings to consultations, because that makes it more of a two-way street. So that's my comment on that one. Thank you. And basically, consultation means no input to policy as far as I'm concerned. And to the man on the, you know, my love for this phrase, to the man or woman on the Clapham omnibus, briefing implies one direction. No pun intended on the group. But basically, this should be a flow both ways of information. Thank you, Chairman.
Would you like to respond?
Yeah, all I was going to say to that was I think the feeling is with having the additional scrutiny committee, there will be that additional space for that challenge and dialogue. But I appreciate what you've just said is it's maybe consultation, but not feeding into policy development and leaving that policy development role with the scrutiny committees, and still enabling people to feed in that formal forum rather than.
Yep, Councillor Clark.
Well, yeah, but not everybody's going to sit on overview and scrutiny, and there may be a duplication of people on the overview and scrutiny, which then prevents other members who might come to the consultation meeting, is what I would call it, rather than a briefing meeting. So all I'm trying to say is the spirit may be to encourage a two-way street, but Joe Public and some of the members might not see it that way. You see the point I'm trying to make? I may not be very clear, but I hope that helps.
The only other just observation I would make quickly is that of course any members can come along and attend the scrutiny committees and speak with the consent of the chairman. So they can get involved that way. I don't know.
But not everything is going to come to overview and scrutiny, is it?
No, of course.
All I was going to add is I think that not having attended a member briefing more recently, I do believe that they are two-way and they are more consultative than delivering purely a briefing. So I can't see any objection on councillors or members' part in using that terminology. But all I would say is in terms of the Constitution and reflecting that provision in that document, we haven't catered for that scenario. We haven't reflected formally that there will be member briefings in the scenario. We've just referred to the scrutiny function.
Yeah, well, what's the point of the briefing then? I mean, that answers to my point that the briefing is a dump of information on members and not a two-way street. It just that proves the point I'm trying to make, actually.
May I comment here? I wonder whether we're getting bogged down in the definition of the function for overview and scrutiny versus what we as councillors are briefed on regularly throughout the council period. And that would be out of scope of this particular section.
I agree.
Councillor Vickers?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. An observation. We had 2 scrutiny committees when we first went over to the cabinet system back in 2001, I think it was, and I chaired the community overview and scrutiny committee back then, and it worked very well. We combined them to make one scrutiny committee, if my memory serves me correctly, in order to streamline and to save some finance on paying 2 scrutiny chairmen. I accept that now is the time to look at that again, and I perfectly accept that 2 scrutiny committees is a good idea. I share Councillor Clark's slight concern about the wording, and I don't know whether there's a compromise solution to call it briefing stroke consultation. Maybe we could put that in the wording so that it combines both, and therefore there is a two-way conversation. I would be happier with that if that's possible, and the monitoring officer is agreeable to that. I think it just gives a clearer message to the public that this is not just telling us this is what's happened, this is what we're doing, this is what we know that's not the case. But from a purely transparent angle, I think it would be helpful if it could be briefing stroke consultation, if that's possible. Thank you.
Councillor Buffy.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're talking about here is essentially the wording of the report, because these gatherings are not actually reflected or referred to in the Constitution. They are something that we actually do operationally. So there isn't wording in the Constitution to amend because it's not there. In terms of a compromise naming for it, I propose workshops, really, which kind of reflects the collaborative nature of it. But as I say, that's for the report rather than actually for the Constitution. It's not, because it's not actually in there.
Right, Councillor Serkis.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to support what my colleague said. Go back to the start of PDAX. It was very much a sort of a compromise because we had the opportunity at that stage of moving back to the committee system. And the feeling was that we reviewed the situation and decided to stick to the model. But there was strong concern from backbenchers that they wanted to be involved in policy development. And so they were called policy development advisory groups. As it happens, a lot of what went on in these meetings was not policy development, they were just briefings. However, my colleagues are right to say that the problem with the term briefings is it's a passive. And what we want is interactive. And it's not just a question of acceptability vis-a-vis the public. It's also a question of acceptability and the impression it creates with members. And members need to feel that these meetings are a genuine, better alternative to meetings because they are interactive, not passive, and they genuinely are involved in the whole issue of policy development. And Councillor Clark was quite right to point out that the one we had about Fields in Trust and Horsham Park was actually a very good example of a meeting that was about, that ended up as moving with policy development. And so it's a misdescription. And so I would support something that implies interactive.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to that?
I'm happy to feed that back to officers internally, thank you.
Any other observations on this section? Okay, would you like to move on to the next one?
Sorry, the next part of our presentation is in relation to the council's planning committee function. And I make no secret of the fact that the working group, the members of that group did not support this proposal unanimously. There was overwhelming support, but I think there may have been an abstention and one member who wasn't terribly keen on the revised proposals. So if we look at our current arrangements to start with, so the key features are, as you know, we have two planning committees, one for the north and one for the south of the district. All members are eligible to sit on a committee unless they opt out from doing so. Currently, we have 22 members on one and 20 on the other. Ward members may speak and vote on applications in their ward. All ward members may speak for up to 5 minutes, And in terms of public speaking and participation, parish or neighbourhood councils can speak for up to 5 minutes, and additionally, the members of the public may speak up for 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes. The planning function has been subject to a few external reviews. So, for example, back in 2018, the Planning Advisory Service, commonly known as PAS, looked specifically at the operation of the Planning Committee. In 2024, the Local Government Association looked at our governance arrangements. And then in 2024, PAS looked again at the development management function, touching on the Planning Committee function. So what did the 2018 PAS review find? They observed that there are significant differences in the performance of the two committees and the conduct of the meetings. Second, there is inconsistency of approach in decision-making between the committees. The need to achieve consistency raises the option of having a single planning committee and strongly suggests a need for better member training. And that site visits need to be considered with caution, as they can be very time-consuming and can exclude some members because of their availability. So what were the recommendations stemming? So what were the recommendations stemming from this review? First, that the council should consider moving to a single planning committee. Second, that the council should consider reducing the number of members sitting on those planning committees. Third, the council should enhance its training offering and make training compulsory. And also that the council should consider introducing a process for the selection and management of site visits. In 2024, we had a peer review, and they also made a number of observations. They said there may be opportunities to merge the committees, and this could streamline processes and improve efficiency in the council, and that the current arrangements would benefit from a review with the possibility of enabling a reduction in membership to enable an enhanced level of training. And this is of particular concern as not all members attend the mandatory training sessions and understand the guidelines.
And then again in 2024, there was a PAS review which focused solely on development management. As part of that review, they had various meetings with cross-party members, and some of their key observations were that it was apparent that some members were finding it difficult to differentiate between their ward councillor and planning committee roles. It was incredibly unusual to have all councillors sitting on a planning committee, and that changes proposed should improve the operational efficiency of the committee process, as well as avoid the potential blurring of roles of ward councillors and planning committee members.
So a number of key themes have stemmed from these three reviews. They're all leading towards one planning committee, with certainly a reduced membership, regular compulsory training, and a process for selecting and managing site visits. That the current structure may not be as efficient as it could be, and that the current structure lends itself to inconsistent decision making, certainly between the two committees, and that some councillors have difficulty in differentiating between their role as a ward member and also a planning committee member.
And we also conducted an internal review between 2023-2024. And that looked at the practices at 22 district and borough councils in West Sussex, East Sussex and Surrey, and focused on a number of areas, including the composition of planning committees, local ward member participation, public participation, mandatory training, mandatory site visits, and that included a workshop, presentations to the Planning and Infrastructure Policy Development Advisory Group, and visits to other councils. And some of the observations from that review were that most councils had one planning committee. Of those councils with one planning committee, the smallest contained 8 members and the largest contained 19 members, and the average size was 12 members. And most councils did not have mandatory site visits. And just a couple of points of note was the council that had 19 members was Mole Valley. They currently only have 15 members on their planning committee, and Surrey Heath, which was another council that we looked at as part of that process, has also reduced the size of its planning committee from 15 members to 11 members.
And hot off the press, the PAS website has been updated. So they did a survey at the back end of last year, and it's part of the government's assistance to the government in their review of planning committees. So they carried out a survey, and the key findings with 122 participants was that most councils had a single planning committee. Most councils had between 9 and 12 members, so supporting the work of the internal review we had. Most common public speaking were 3 minutes, and some had 5 minutes. And most councils had mandatory training for planning committee members.
I'm just going to touch briefly on the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which has had or is having its second reading in the House of Commons today. And that bill proposes changes to the Town and Country Planning Act. Oh.
Sorry, for those who are not in the room, we have another technical problem.
We take it out and put it back in again. That always works, doesn't it? It's like it died, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know.
It's glowing green.
Melissa, can you see if Max is available?
Oh, there we go. Come back. It's come back. That's fine. Okay, so the Planning and Infrastructure Bill proposes changes to the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 to allow the Secretary of State to make regulations to firstly establish a national scheme of delegation, secondly to require training for planning committee members, and thirdly to control the size of planning committees. And the government have said that they believe that planning committees are not currently operating as effectively as possible, and that having smaller planning committees can lead to more effective debates and decision making. The government have also said that large and unwieldy committees will be banned. And also, just a point of note is when the government last introduced a cap on the size of a regulatory committee. That was for licensing committees established under the Licensing Act 2003, and that has an upper cap of 15, has to have between 10 and 15 members.
So the proposal before members today, and as is reflected in the Constitution, is as follows. It will come as no surprise. One single planning committee with 15 members, excluding the Cabinet Member for Planning, the Leader of the Council and the Chairman of the Council, and a substitute pool of members for up to 15 members. Ward members on the Planning Committee may speak but not vote on applications within their ward. Ward members may continue to speak for 5 minutes. There'll be enhanced public involvement, increased mandatory training, managed site visits, minor changes to scheme delegation, and a special responsibility allowance. And we'll just pick up a few of those themes now more closely.
So, ward member voting restrictions. So the PAS review noted that some councils were finding it difficult to differentiate between their roles. And that is, you know, I've received feedback from councillors directly to myself on that matter as well, and the kind of perception of members' roles from the general public as well. So the changes to the Constitution introduce a rule that ward members may speak but not vote on applications within their wards, which will create that clear distinction. And there are other councils that already have that within their constitutions.
May I remind councillors to keep any comments until the end when you're invited to speak. Thank you.
So most certainly from a legal and a monitoring officer's perspective, what are the benefits of imposing a restriction on ward members voting in planning committee? Well, to my mind, it gives those local ward members a stronger voice. Ward members can engage more meaningfully in the pre-application process without the risk of predetermination, and ward members can speak freely on applications within their wards at planning committee without the risk of predetermination or being accused of being biased. So In reality, what does it do? It reduces the risk of legal challenge for the council.
There have also been some changes There have also been some changes to enhance public involvement in the planning process. So the proposal is that the public speaking time will be increased to 3 minutes from 2 minutes. Neighbourhood forums will have a dedicated slot and be able to speak for 5 minutes. Parish and neighbourhood councils, there are a couple of changes affecting them. So representatives from each parish or neighbourhood council will be able to speak for 5 minutes where the application site is in more than one ward. And representatives from adjacent parish or neighbourhood councils will be able to speak for 5 minutes where the area would, in the chairman's opinion, be affected by the application site. In addition, there will be an express power for the chairman to vary those time limits where they consider it reasonable to do so in the interests of fairness.
So the proposal is for managed site visits, not mandatory site visits. There's some guidance, PAS guidance from 2019, which talks about the need for site visits where there's clear and substantial benefit, and where it will be necessary to view the site if it's difficult to visualise, or perhaps because it's particularly contentious. Other considerations that have been taken into account is the potential exclusion of some members if we were to mandate them, the resources, technology advances and environmental implications. So the proposed planning code of good practice includes that members can request a site visit if they feel it's necessary. Any requests must be in good time ahead of the planning committee. A process to determining whether an organised site visit should be undertaken. Sorry, yeah. I haven't got the power of the slides. At the direction of myself and or in consultation with the chairman. And ultimately, you know, I think members recognise there's lots of ways that you can really understand the site. Google Maps, Street View, you know, we are looking at technology for planning officers, so we could perhaps do videos and things like that on site. There's information on the public file, and also members may wish to visit in their own time rather than have an organised site visit organised by officers. So there are a couple of changes to the scheme of delegation. Planning committee will now be authorised to determine certain charges. So such as pre-application charges. So at the moment, anytime we want to change a charge in planning that is not set by national government, we have to go to full council. So this proposal is to give planning committee some powers to change those, which is helpful, again, going back to the point of, around the cycle of full council and having a bit more flexibility there. All members can now refer an application to planning committee. So before it just had to be the local ward member. This provides flexibility if an application again adjoins wards or is particularly contentious. And the proposal is that members can also refer applications to planning committee following additional consultations. So you'll be aware at the moment, as set out within the constitution, members have 35 days from the date of validation. In reality, members probably don't get 35 days because it takes a period of time to validate the application. Again, if the application needs reconsulting for a period of time, members can't call it to committee at that point, whereas a parish could. So this is seeking to align that to ensure that members get a full period of time from validation and also within any consultation period.
So just to finish off on this particular topic, so what are the benefits of the revised planning committee structure? Just a few spring to mind. So effective representation of all wards. Ward members can speak more freely without the risk of challenge, given they'll be precluded from voting. There will be a pool of substitutes, increased mandatory training. There will be a process for selecting site visits, and there'll be a sitting allowance for each of those members on those committees. Do any members have any observations on this part of the presentation?
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to extend a particular thanks to the officers for bringing us up to date on some more recent developments for the context of this, particularly as regards the latest information from PAS and, of course, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which is, as one of the officers mentioned, enjoying its second reading in Parliament today. This is a live issue, of course. Some of those important pieces of context we wouldn't have had the chance to consider in the consultations that we had within the working group. But it's gratifying to see that these are nevertheless part of our considerations today, and that all of the information that's coming that's pertinent to the context of these proposals reinforces the rationale that officers have been presenting for the changes proposed. And I think that's very useful context. So thank you for including that.
Councillor Vickers.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the working group for the enormous amount of work they've done to get us to this stage, and to the monitoring officer and to Bradley. I know it's taken up a huge amount of time, so thank you. I have some observations. I mean, I'm quite happy to accept that increased public participation is a good idea. I also support mandatory planning training, and I thought we had that already, even though I think you've said lots of members haven't actually participated in that. I also welcome the scheme of delegation in terms of the planning committee being able to decide on charges to cover costs and so on. So that's fine. I'm just slightly surprised at the timing of this. As Councillor Brooks said, the bill is going through its second reading today, and the government's made it clear, or Angela Rayner has made it very clear, that she's going to determine what the maximum size of a planning committee should look like. So my feeling is this is a little bit premature, that we might be having to do this all over again once this bill has passed all its stages, and we might have to relook at our planning committee. I understand why there may be less consistency across two planning committees. I've been on both committees, and I accept that there are significant differences, but the areas they cover, the Northern Committee is very much more an urban committee, and the Southern Committee is much more rural. So there are bound to be differences in the way those planning applications are handled. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what other members have to say about it. We are in an unusual position. There aren't that many planning authorities that still have all members on planning committee. And I accept some changes necessary, but I do wonder about the timing, bearing in mind that the government is going to tell us fairly shortly what the maximum number is likely to be.
Sorry. Emma Parks. Sorry, Ward. Which one of you?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few observations. Thank you, Councillor Vickers. I met MHCRG about something to do with water neutrality a little while ago, and they said never wait for government to make any decisions. And ultimately, we don't. Whilst we see a direction of travel, and the bill is going through, it requires secondary legislation. So I think we don't have a clear time frame. My other comment would be, why do we want to wait to be shown as an example of bad practice and be pushed into to making these changes when it becomes legislation? And my third observation is, really, I see this as a stepping stone to moving forward. When the secondary legislation comes in, there will be a national scheme of delegation. We'll have a lot less applications going to planning committee. Really, this is a stepping stone, and it's an opportunity to put one single planning committee in place. And we'll have a year or so probably of that before further changes come in. And it really is a good opportunity to do it now, to get this in place, and then we'll be in a much better position to implement the further changes that are coming. Thank you.
You may, Councillor Vickers.
I should have said I'm also concerned that in a couple of years' time we won't exist, and what's the point of doing it now?
Well, I can use a prime example of procurement. which came and went and came and went again. And if we'd actually put it in the first place, we would have had to review it within a year anyway. So, like Emma says, if we don't do it when we have the opportunity, we may either be squeezed into doing something much serious, and we'll have to review it anyway. So that's my personal opinion. Monitoring officer, do you have something to add?
Well, just one further observation about the future of LGR is ultimately we don't know what that is yet, and the way it's worked in other areas is that effectively it's been operational for a number of years as a distinct geographical area. So I think that there's nothing there to say that as soon as we become a different body, everything automatically changes and everything, you know, would. So I think again, it's an opportunity to do it now to put us in a good place moving forward.
I think all I would say and add to that is twofold. The first thing being that in terms of redoing the work, it would amount to a simple drafting exercise looking at one specific section in the Constitution, so it would prove relatively simple. And the second point that I would make is the fact that it's incumbent upon us as officers and councillors to work together to review our processes, to benchmark what we're doing, to strive for continual improvement. And so I'm not sure it's appropriate to wait for third parties, unconnected third parties, to be mandating what we should be doing as a district council. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
I have a number of comments and observations as well. Emma, can you slip back to, I can't remember the latest thing of 2024-25 you put up about how other people do it? You're going a bit fast for me at the moment. You keep on going. Yeah, that one. Okay. First, I've got a question. How many legal challenges have we had in the last 10 years?
Well, people have been predetermined.
Or how many times have we been challenged about how many times have we been challenged about predetermination in the last 10 years?
I'm not aware of any, Paul, but what I would say is there's been various cases where we managed to avoid it by the skin of our teeth. So I think that I know where you're coming from, but I just think, why are we so special that we have to have an archaic system that's not best practice with significant risk attached to it? You know, well, that's my view. Thank you, Paul.
If I may, Chairman, I'll challenge that statement because it says, and I quote, most councils had a single planning committee. Most, not all. So therefore, just because we don't have a single planning committee doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it different. And the fact that we're different doesn't make it bad. I mean, I accept that the agenda from officers has always been to go down this road, and I understand the reasons why. All I'm saying is, just because we're different doesn't make it bad and doesn't make it wrong. And as you can see here, not everybody has a single planning committee. Inconsistency of planning decisions, I can understand where you're coming from, but as my colleague has said, the difference between north and south and the nature of them. And also I would point out that, I mean, we're dealing with human beings here. And no matter how much you train human beings, they're not, what's the word? I'm not quite sure what I can use as an appropriate picture, but basically, no matter how much you train people, you're still dealing with people and they'll do things differently anyway. So my personal view is I appreciate all the work that's gone in it, and a lot of it I think makes perfect sense, like the training and stuff. But I think, you know, what is the point of upsetting quite a lot of the members the first time, and then you're going to be upsetting them probably again in the next year? I mean, I accept the point about MHCLG and the government.
Can't guarantee
This
it.
lot seem to not bother about public consultation and do what the hell they want. But I mean, fine. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and observations. Anyone else have anything? Councillor Bevis.
Thank you, Chairman. Just an observation about the way the Constitution sits at the moment, that the head of place has the option to move consideration of a planning application to full council if they feel that there is a risk that the planning committee may get it wrong, basically. if we're going to introduce mandatory training, then presumably only those councillors that have gone through mandatory planning training can consider that planning application at full council. And I think that needs to be spelt out in the new constitution. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor. Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations, really. Firstly, with regard to mandatory training, if you take this to extremists, there's a risk that you wouldn't be able to differentiate between members and planning officers. So you then get in the, well, why bother with the members? And coming back from that, I like to think we bother with members because they are more diverse and just have different views. And it's quite important, I think, that rather than training, it's more education into the planning systems. So that was my first observation. The second one was regarding managed site visits. Maybe the Green Group is somewhat different. I don't know. A lot of people have trouble finding daytime to do such site visits. So if a member really can't manage a site visit, does that affect their status at the subsequent planning meeting? And if it doesn't, then why bother doing the site visit? Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a couple of responses there. In terms of training, I don't envisage it being significantly more than what we already do. The issue at the moment is we don't have any teeth within the constitution. So if somebody doesn't do it, we can't actually stop them from sitting on planning committee. So whilst we've already kind of always expressed it as a necessary, at the end of the day, we just don't have the teeth within it. So, and you know, planning can be a difference of opinion, providing you can back it up by planning policy and you can defend it, and that's the nature of planning committee. It's the democratic process there, isn't it? You might have a different view, and if you can substantiate that, then that's fine. That's the system. I'm not trying to make you all think the same as us, Councillor Croker. And then what was the second point? I've completely forgotten now.
Mandatory training and
Site
no, I
visit.
did that one.
Sorry,
Yeah, site visits. So in terms of site visits, we do get various requests for site visits, organised site visits. So this seeks to manage that. But if a councillor can't attend an organised site visit, I don't think that's critical for two reasons. They may be able to attend the site in their own time. Most sites are available, you can see from public vantage points, footpaths or whatever, but ultimately that member has to decide if they feel they need to go on site to determine that application. If they have a sufficient understanding of the site from their own research and they feel that therefore they could make that decision, then that's for them really. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair. I understand that there are some members in here who want to discuss some of the information they're being given in real time, but could I ask that we don't have that happen? It distracts me from being able to attend to what the officers are saying.
Thank you for that point of order. Okay. Do you have anything further you wish to add? Monitoring officer?
I don't, thank you.
Councillor Buffy.
Just a couple of things, Chair. More diverse. Having looked round our development management team on quite a regular basis, and also looked round our council chamber, I wouldn't make too many assumptions about which one's more diverse. In terms of the full council elevation point, it's an interesting one. I think just one of the things I would possibly mention is that I believe the reason behind the ability to actually make that reference up to full council largely has to do with committee being about to make a decision which could have significant financial implications for the council. So I've not been through one of these full council meetings yet, but I would imagine that in that situation, what you know, it's a different consideration from an ordinary planning decision because of implications. I don't know. It's just another thing I would note on there. And just in terms of some of the other discussion points, I would have real problems with a suggestion that essentially, basically, we've asked for opinions on this, on the way our planning committees operate 3 or 4 times. We've pretty much had the same answer every time. We've got a clear indication from government that essentially the way we're operating at the moment is, you know, wrong is a very strong word. I wouldn't use that. Inappropriate, possibly. And I would have deep reservations about basically, you know, if you've been told something's inappropriate 3 or 4 times, the idea that you just carry on doing it until something happens at some later date just feels negligent to me. And I couldn't do that in good conscience. You know, we've gone through this process. We you know, putting the competition together, all the work's been done, everything's been considered. Not everybody's happy with it, but we've come to a point that we're at. And to just sort of kind of be clutching at straws about, oh, but there's another thing that might mean we can put it off. It just doesn't feel right to me. So I'm content to go forward with the recommendations that we have before us. Thank you.
Councillor Serkis?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I first of all ask a question? We would have these substitutes, this pool of 15 substitutes. If somebody can't make a meeting, are they able to choose anybody within that pool of substitutes, or will there be limitations? Can I ask that as a question before I make some comments?
When you say anybody, do you mean anybody from
Anyone
the group
who's-
or anybody from your group, from the group?
No, anyone
Anybody.
who is a member of the group of 15 substitutes. Is that in the sole discretion and choice of the member who can't make a meeting?
I should imagine that if the committee ends up being politically balanced, you would have to choose a substitute from your political group. But if it ends up not being politically balanced, then you could choose any substitute from that pool.
Right, okay. Okay, that wasn't clear, but thank you for that. Go on. A couple of comments. The leader said that a number of people had said that the current arrangements were inappropriate, including the peer review, which I participated in. They said it was inappropriate, frankly, because they'd never come across it before. And it's very easy to say something's inappropriate when you haven't had any experience of it. The second point is that the don't wait for government point.
Point of order, Chairman. I just have to say that's incorrect.
Well, how can that be? It's an opinion.
It's not what they said. They didn't say, oh, we don't like this because we haven't seen it before. Most of them are aware of this happening in various places. They spelled out their reasons why they thought it was inappropriate in their report.
Well, that wasn't the impression I got from talking to the leader of Winchester City Council, anyway. So
I think there's a difference between what's in writing in the report and what you may have discussed.
yes, maybe off
verbally.
the record, people are more honest. But there you go.
I'm afraid I take great exception on the leader of Winchester City Council that he's dishonest. I know him very well. He's not a dishonest man.
No, I
Would you
wonder
like
whether
to
can I just make my
make your point, please?
yes, thank you very much. Don't wait for government. The truth is, on local government reorganisation, the government has acted very fast, and they're going to act fast on this. Why? Because they have housing targets they want to realise by the time of the next election. They believe that district councillors are standing in the way of them achieving their housing targets. That is a large reason for why they want local government reorganisation, and it is a major reason why they want reform of planning committees. I think we have to accept that. That is so. Given that's the case, they're likely to act quite quickly. On the subject of, I'm in the unique position, I think I can say this, I've been the only member of this council who's ever served on one of these professional committees. And I can tell you that site visits were absolutely crucial. They were seen as absolutely a vital part. We had an example of how knowledge of
May I interject and ask you to make your point, please?
well, that's what I'm doing.
No, but you're getting into examples which
All right.
from history, and we've already suggested
Okay,
that
well,
there would be technical uses.
Well, okay, I was going to give an example from the last Planning South Committee, which shows how actual knowledge of the site can improve decision making. But what I will say is this, I have suggested to the leader that we could have if you have the warm words that are up on the screen about site visits, you will get no change. It will be the existing regime. If you want an enhanced role for site visits, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a system whereby, say, three members of the committee could request a site visit. And just as 8 members of the public can bring about a reference to the planning committee from a delegated decision, you could have 3 members of the committee actually calling for a site visit. So you wouldn't get site visits all the time. A lot of applications wouldn't go to site visit, but where there was a strong feeling there should be a site visit, members would have some control over it. So I wrote to the leader and suggested this at one stage. I don't think I've had a response from the leader, but that would be, in my view, a much better way of dealing with site visits than basically keeping them as they are, where site visits are a very rare occurrence indeed. So that would be my view. Just to clarify, because some people have said that I was supported professional planning committees. I did, as long as it was done properly. And site visits were a crucial part of doing it properly, because when members came to a committee to discuss an application and they had visited the site, they had a much clearer idea of the issues, things like topography and distance. All these things are much more obvious when people have been on a site visit. And so I just leave that thought. I don't know whether the leader wants to respond to that.
I'll respond in as much as to say, I'll be honest, I can't remember whether it was an email or a conversation, but I'll say again what I've said before. I'm not on this as involved in the working group or on this committee as the leader of the council. I'm here as a member, just like all the other members. So I don't get to decide on my own what's in or what's out. You know, it's available to members of the working group to make suggestions to the rest of the working group if they want to.
Thank you. I know Councillor Ellis-Brown wants to speak, but if the monitor officer wants to interject.
I think Emma would like to speak.
Just quickly, Chairman. I think we have to recognise that many members do visit sites. I know they do because they talk to me about it. They've driven past, they've walked the footpath, they know the site regularly because they walk their dog by it. So many members know the sites already before they come to planning committee. When the agendas are published, many of them do go and have a look in their own time. So I think what Councillor Serkis is wanting is organised mandatory site visits, whereas site visits quite often take place anyway and have no need to be organised. And, you know, I'm not sure what year it was, Councillor Serkis, you were on this other planning committee, but, you know, things have moved on a little bit. and technology is available where members can have access to a whole suite of information online, or visit the site themselves, or the officer photos, which we are looking to put in an accessible place for members to be able to really understand the site. There will be exceptions where perhaps it really would be useful and you cannot get into the site because it's all boarded up, for instance, where officers will arrange a site visit for members to attend. But I think the way that we are proposing managed site visits, would meet the criteria where members can visit a site when it's necessary to do so. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few observations. I attended a course on planning at Warwick University. There were 28 other councils represented there, and excluding Horsham, the average size of committee was 12. The nearest one to us was 15. So, and the PAS survey identifies that we are unique, if you want to put it that way, in having a committee of 21. If one was observing a committee of that size and using research, that committee size is far too big. The bigger the committee, the more inefficient that committee is. And it means that members are open to not offering the level of involvement that one could offer if it was slightly smaller. With smaller committees, you then have the uncomfortable position of expressing different views that maybe you would normally express in a bigger committee, but you want to be seen to be doing the right thing for your ward committee, your ward constituents. I think the opportunity for members, if they are not on the committee, is hugely beneficial. From my own experience, if I step away from the committee, which I have done, I can work very, very closely with my local residents on a particular application without the fear of predetermination. Members need to be aware, and I'm sure many of them are, that these committee meetings are scrutinised by developers or people making the application, and the merest hint that we've gone wrong will result in a challenge, whether that's a judicial review or whether it's an appeal. Regarding the comment around professional committees, well, I've been on a number of professional committees, both in the public sector, local government, central government, and certainly in central government. If you've not done the mandatory training, you're not at the committee. If you've not read the papers, you're not at the committee. So I think mandatory training should be in place for members, give us a better understanding of what we are considering. And I think without completing that mandatory training, then you should not be voting or sitting on the committee. I think that's important, and we should have that opportunity. So I think there are a number of issues here. One is around process, and that is clearly how we come to our decision in the committee. And I think as a committee of 21 is far too big. It's not as efficient as it could be, and it puts greater emphasis on other aspects. A smaller committee is actually also not beneficial, and I think 13 to 15, and certainly 15, is a good number of representatives on that committee. So I think I would endorse the recommendations of the officers in this with the new constitution on planning. Thank you.
So Councillor Brooks first, Councillor Vickers next.
Just very briefly, Chair, to follow on from some of the observations that Councillor Ellis-Brown just made about expectations for members when various types of training or engagement are mandatory, and in response to some of the points that Councillor Serkis eventually got round to making, and the concern expressed by Councillor Croker earlier. If we have an expectation of mandatory site visits, then one might assume, therefore, an inability to attend such mandatory site visits would be disqualifying. And we have a very wide range of different kinds of sites, some in rural areas where there are a number of challenges for access, and we have councillors who sit on committees who are variously unwell at certain points or differently abled and have different physical abilities and different abilities to access sites. I believe it would be an onerous expectation, therefore, to have mandatory site visits, which would potentially disqualify certain councillors from being able to attend, and therefore potentially create a situation where they were disqualified from being able to participate, not out of a lack of willingness or engagement, but out of some different physical ability or difference of circumstance. And that doesn't feel particularly fair or right. I think that creates a problem that would otherwise be avoided, because the current proposals, which strongly encourage and recognise the benefit but don't disqualify councillors if they aren't able, for instance, to be able to attend a site visit, are a much more flexible and a much more reasonable thing.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
A very quick question, Chairman. It was stated that there'd be 15 members of this single planning committee with up to 15 substitutes. And if I've understood correctly, the monitoring officer said if it's politically balanced, then the substitute would come from the political group that the person who couldn't be there. I don't quite understand what you mean by if it's politically balanced, please.
When discussing this in the working group, members agreed that this committee need not necessarily be politically balanced if the leaders could agree the political composition of that committee. Therefore, it would only default to being politically balanced in the event of disagreement.
Councillor Buffy.
Just one further clarification on that, which is probably a procedural thing, but I think the law says that essentially it's got to be a politically balanced committee unless council votes unanimously or without objection to actually disapply political balance. So there could be a scenario whether, even practically speaking, normally it's politically balanced, but then given one annual meeting, someone objects to that, it ends up being politically balanced. So you have to cover both bases.
Any other comments, observations? Somebody did put their hand up over here, but I can't. Okay. Councillor Clark.
Being a bit dense, how exactly does that work? In other words, is the default position at the start of the year it's not politically balanced unless somebody objects, or is it the other way around? I'm not clear. I'm a bit thick, sorry.
No, not at all. The starting position is that the group leaders would see if they can agree who should sit on the committee. So if you agreed, for example, 5 members from each party, that would be the political composition. You would then take that proposal to the annual council meeting, and on the understanding that no councillor in the room voted against that proposal, it would be not politically balanced and reflect the leader's wishes.
Thank you. Got it.
I think we've got to the end of the comments and observations, so do you want to move on to the next subject?
I think now we're on our penultimate section. I'm going to hand over to Bradley to talk you through public engagement.
So we have touched on a little bit of this already, so first of all, at cabinet meetings, statements will be introduced, so members of the public will be able to make statements instead of asking questions at cabinet. At planning committee, as I mentioned earlier, public speaking time being increased to 3 minutes from 2 minutes. Neighbourhood forums being able to speak for 5 minutes, and then those changes relating to the parish and neighbourhood councils that I referred to earlier on. And then additionally is the reintroduction of a petition scheme. If the petition gets 250 signatures, that will lead to an officer giving evidence at a policy and scrutiny committee, and if a signature gets 1,000 signatures, that will lead to it being debated at full council. any observations in relation to those points?
Councillor Clark.
Sorry, being a bit dense again, it's quite late. If you go back again. Cabinet statements instead of questions, does that mean statements only, or can people still ask questions?
Statements only. So
Statements only.
statements only. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And the second point, if you flip to the next one, 250 signatures, officers to get evidence of policy and scrutiny committee. What exactly do you mean by that?
So under the petition scheme, if it gets 250 signatures, it's a requirement for a certain officer, and they are most senior officers in the organisation that are listed in the petition scheme will go to policy and scrutiny committee and give evidence in relation to a particular item as of concern to that individual. So it is sort of a halfway house, if you like, between the full debate at full council and having involvement of scrutiny.
Any other comments or observations? Councillor Buffy.
Thank you, Chairman. It has been brought to my attention by some members of the public in terms of changing the cabinet item from questions to statements, which I support, and indeed they do as well. But that there's now a slight inconsistency in the draft constitution between statements at committee meetings rather than as opposed to statements at cabinet meetings, whereby, as currently drafted, cabinet statements need to be submitted in entirety in advance, whereas this is not actually the case at committee meetings. I think this is possibly part of the process of how we arrived at the change from questions to statements at cabinet meetings. But I was just wondering what other committee members thought of essentially having these aligned so that they're all that it's treated the same at cabinet as it is for committee meetings, in that members of the public need to give notice by a certain date at which they wish to give a statement on a specific agenda item, but not necessarily actually submit the statement in full, because given when papers come out and when the deadline is, it doesn't leave an awful lot of time for them to actually compose their final statement and submit it.
Thank you. Bradley, did you want to respond?
Oh no, I think Councillor Buffy was sort of suggesting. I don't see if anyone else have any comments.
Any other members of the committee wish to comment?
Just to say that I'm supportive of consistency of approach across the different committees. I think that seems a reasonable observation.
Okay, Monitoring Officer, how would you like to take that forward?
As we're still dealing with the presentation, you haven't yet moved the recommendations and opened up the floor to debate. I think any amendment in that regard will have to wait.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to the next item.
So the last part of our presentation relates to the property delegations. So what are these? They refer to the authority given to the officers to manage the council's asset and estate portfolio. So why have they been revisited? The Overview and Scrutiny Committee, you may recall, constituted a task and finish group to review, amongst other things, these delegations. And the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee very kindly presented this item to Cabinet earlier last week. So what are the proposals? That the head of property be authorised first to deal with routine acquisitions and disposals with a value of less than £100,000, to deal with routine acquisitions and disposals with a value of between £100,000 to the key decision threshold in consultation with the relevant cabinet member, to deal with non-routine acquisitions and non-routine disposals with a value of less than £100,000 in consultation with the chief finance officer and the monitoring officer, to deal with non-routine acquisitions and non-routine disposals with a value of between £100,000 and the key decision threshold in consultation with the relevant cabinet member, the chief finance officer and the monitoring officer. And in these contexts, routine refers to aligning with market norms, statutory requirements, and that there being no unusual or unique complexities involved with the transaction. And the last delegation, I believe, to deal with the appropriation of land in consultation with both the Chief Finance Officer and the Monitoring Officer, and the relevant Cabinet member must be consulted in relation to non-routine appropriation, and in this context, non-routine appropriation referring to a significant change in use, for example, converting a car park to a development site. So how did these revisions come about? I worked very closely with the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and also Councillor Waters to devise a new regime incorporating both senior officer oversight from a legal and financial perspective and from a member oversight. And I also consulted naturally the Chief Finance Officer and the Head of Property to make sure that they were fit from an operational perspective. Do any members have any observations on these delegations?
That's a no, which is thank you. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. Prior to putting this to debate, I will move the recommendation in the normal way. I'll be proposing 2 alterations to this. The first is to incorporate a minor change to the Planning Code of Good Practice to clarify that the obligations referred to in paragraph 6.4.1 bracketed F of the code relate only to planning applications submitted by a councillor. The second, to make it clear that if approved by full council, the constitution will be effective from the new municipal year, being the 23rd of April 2025. With this meeting's consent, I propose that the recommendation on page 7 of the agenda is altered so that it reads as follows. 1, to recommend to council that it adopts the constitution to be effective from the 23rd of April 2025 as contained in Appendix B to this report, with the exception of councillors' allowance scheme, which will be the subject of a separate report, subject to replacing the words "to this end" in paragraph 6.4.1 bracketed F of the Planning Code of Good Practice with the words "in relation to any application submitted by them." And I'm sorry you don't have this in front of you. I trust all members' consent, but please confirm. Okay, thank you. Councillor Vickers, were you going to say something?
Oh, what are we consenting to? Just the modification?
It's the modification of the wording. Providing that no one objects to this alteration. Oh, sorry, that's my notes. Okay, do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Do you wish to speak now or later in the debate?
I'll speak later if required.
Okay. This is why I was quite careful in allowing comments and observations during the earlier sessions, because now we have the debate. So I'm happy to open it up to the floor. Is there anyone that wishes to make any further comments? Okay, that's no. Oh, sorry, Councillor Buffy.
Just really on the point I was asking about the, how do I phrase this?
Are you making an
Public
amendment?
statements. Only if it's uncontentious in terms of essentially adding on to your modification, removing the requirement for public statements to cabinet public to submit statements to cabinet in advance. Additionally, we delegate authority to the monitoring officer to make the necessary revisions. So essentially, it would bring statements at cabinet into the same framework as statements at committee meetings. That's all.
Monitoring officer.
Yeah, so I believe that Councillor Buffy has proposed an amendment. Do you have a seconder?
Councillor Brooks.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Okay. So if we can have a vote on that, please. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Amendment, I will return to the substantive to vote on.
Okay, so we'll go back to the full constitution as it stands with the amendments as proposed and agreed. So all those in favour? It's 5-4. All those against? 1, Councillor Croker, and all those abstaining? We have 2 abstentions. Thank you. The recommendation passes. Okay, so we move to urgent business. There is no urgent business. So that concludes the business of this meeting, and I now therefore declare this meeting closed at 18:59. Thank you very much for your participation.